Who would be a Wolves fan, eh?
On goes ball. People might yet win it here for Wolves. Blasting the shot. What a goal!
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Wolves Fancast YouTube channel for another episode of myself, Gully's tactical analysis on what is a rather grim Wednesday evening. So apologies if you can hear any of the weather whacking against the window behind me. But we have got some good news to share, it seems. The likely appointment of Julen Lopetegui as new Wolves manager. It's been a while coming. Third time is the charm. And I'm personally grateful just on the basis that a good day's worth of research has not gone down the toilet, and I can actually share with you a video that I was looking to do at the time that Lopetegui turned us down for the second time, actually, a few weeks ago. Now, he's obviously been a very long-term target for Wolves, a Mendes client, and it's kind of a bit of a traditional appointment for the club at this moment in time. And I'm just going to have a look specifically at his time at Sevilla, where he was manager for 3 years. Unfortunately, his time came to an end slightly earlier this season after what was a really bad start to the campaign. But he's been really, really held in high regard by the Sevilla fans. Won a Europa League, as we know, knocking Wolves out in the process. On the way to winning that title during that COVID-affected season. But it really was a successful time for the club, 3 consecutive fourth-place finishes. And I'm going to start by just having a look at kind of a bit of an overview of the data behind some of his success and what made his team such a good Sevilla side. To begin with, we'll have a look here at the kind of headline data. So number of points, you can see there, I've divided this by per season, so from 19-20 through to last season 21-22, and it's really impressive kind of the points tallies that he's racking up, nothing below 70 there. 2021 from a league perspective being kind of the peak of the Lopetegui era at Sevilla, and especially when you look at the XG figures, the highest total that they actually amounted during his time there was during that second season, and really kind of tracked against their performance levels. So as you can see, slightly tailed off in the final season, despite obviously overperforming in actuality. XG wise, 43.5 is quite the drop off from 2020-2021. And a little known former Wolves player there, Rafa Mir, featuring highly in the top scorers charts during that season. But you can see the shape predominantly over the course of those 3 seasons was a 4-3-3, flitting in and out of a 4-2-3-1 in that final campaign. But I think there's parallels that you can draw with Nuno's team, specifically at Wolves, in the sense that the first 2 seasons were really, really successful. Slight drop-off with a number of caveats to that in that third season. And that kind of tends to be the cycle of a top-level manager in football these days. And I'll come on to why things really did drop off to begin with during the 22-23 campaign and why he ended up losing his job. But first and foremost, I think you notice straight away that defensively his teams were solid, less than a goal per game conceded in every single one of those seasons. So whilst we're really kind of looking for our attackers to kind of start punching back at the level that they should be, the first thing that Lopetegui will bring is a defensive solidity. Now, we're not really been renowned for having a leaky defence, but at the same time, there's an edginess about the team. Transition to a back 4, it shows that Lopetegui will be able to build that solid foundation with a back 4, having done so over the years at Sevilla. He was the beneficiary of some excellent talent individually, like Jules Koundé, Diego Carlos, who's obviously moved on to Aston Villa recently as well. But at the same time, it shows his coaching credentials that he was able to build a really solid team with a back 4, which has been slightly alien to us as Wolves fans anyway. Moving on to some further detail, if you look at some of the individual characteristics of his side, heavy kind of involvement in terms of which players were really featuring highly for Lopetegui. I think it kind of gives you an indication of how his teams like to play. In that first season, we'll all remember Ever Banega kind of running the show in that Europa League quarter-final against us, real classy Argentinian midfielder. And that game in the Europa League final was actually his last at the club. But moving on from that, likes of Julen Jordan, who's kind of a midfield all-rounder. But interestingly, I think the fullbacks feature really heavily in touches per 90 and key passes. Key passes being passes that lead to a shot at goal. Jesus Navas has been transformed into a kind of flying fullback, as opposed to the flying winger that you will remember him as at Manchester City. And Marcos Acuna is the left-sided alternative. So he's the man kind of operating on the opposite flank. And you'll notice, I think, with every Lopetegui team of the past, the fullbacks are a key feature. When he was at Porto, he had the kind of twin Brazilian fullbacks in Danilo and Alexandro, who went on to have really good careers at bigger clubs across Europe. They made their name under Lopetegui at Porto. So goes to show that, you know, the likes of Nelson Semedo, the likes of Ryan Aït-Nouri could be he could be looking to them to have a much more of an impact from an attacking sense. And I think you can all agree that we should be looking to get more out of them, given the talent that they have. In terms of players with the most shots at goal over those seasons, Lucas Ocampos scored the winner in that Europa League quarter-final, as we know as well. But the other two very much central strikers, Youssef En-Nesyri and Rafa Mir. So I think we want to get more out of our strikers. Obviously, big issue for us. Not a single goal from a central forward in the season so far, aside from Raul's tapping at the back post against Preston in the Carabao Cup this year. So hopefully he can drag a little bit more. But you'll notice as well that the kind of profile of striker that Lopetegui likes to work with is that taller, kind of all-round centre forward, able to hold the ball up, but attack things in the penalty area as well. And the other thing that I wanted to pick up on was about tackles and interceptions. And you can see there the midfield is very active off the ball in trying to recover it. So Fernando, another former Manchester City player, was the main sitting midfielder for Lopetegui across his tenure, and Julen Jordan as well, featuring in that third season. So starting to kind of build up a little bit of a picture of the way his team like to play. And if you have a look at the squad as a whole and how they performed in certain areas while he was at the club against the rest of the teams in La Liga, average possession, you can see, featured really, really highly in what is a very technical league, being the third best team, second best team, and then third best team across 3 seasons. Shows that Lopetegui likes his teams to dominate the ball. He features technical players across the pitch. I think you'll see when I come onto it in a minute that his forward line features technical players that aren't necessarily kind of out and out wingers. They're midfielders who tend to get involved in the play a little bit more than kind of out and out wingers would tend to, coming inside a little bit, with those fullbacks kind of operating in really high and wide positions and overlapping. What you will notice there, though, which is kind of caveated by the fact that the team held a lot of possession, is pressures per 90. They did feature lowly within the entire kind of La Liga standing. So bottom in 2021 and 2021-22, caveated, like I say, by the fact that they did tend to dominate the ball in most of their games, kind of well over 50% possession on average in most of their games, teams sitting back against them perhaps. But it just goes to show that if anybody expects us to start really kind of becoming a high pressing team and recovering the ball, you know, in an instant, it's not going to be the way. But I also would like to suggest that it's not the way the squad is built at the moment. Finally, shots per 90, again, looking good for the first 2 years, dropped off again in that third season, and that kind of tallies up with the XG over performance that they had as well. So middle of the road in terms of amount of shots, but they managed to score quite a few goals, probably from distance. Something that Wolves fans were pretty used to as well. But what I really like about the seasons, the data across the 3 seasons is that average shot distance against the rest of the league featuring really, really well. We're a bad team in terms of taking shots from bad positions, but at least in terms of close proximity to goal, Lopetegui will prefer his team to kind of operate closer. So top of the league in 1920, dropped off a little bit again in 2021, but finishing third in that regard in 21-22. Now, things obviously dropped off quite dramatically for Lopetegui this year. Really, really kind of bad start to the season. I wouldn't call it mutinous, but it seemed like his time had specifically come to an end. Now, if you look at kind of the top 5 players who featured in terms of minutes played across his 3 years, you've got Jules Koundé, who sold to Barcelona in the summer, Diego Carlos, obviously, who's now injured at Aston Villa, Yassine Bono, his goalkeeper, which maybe doesn't necessarily affect the way the team plays too much. Jesus Navas, who's now 36 years old, obviously in the twilight of his career, but continuing to feature on that in a right back position. And Lucas Ocampos as well, who has been loaned out to Ajax. And when you think that, the real core of his team has kind of been ripped away from it, much like, the Wolves side, I guess, to an extent this summer with some really kind of real stalwart players kind of moved on from the club, you're expecting some kind of drop off. Is a bit of a transition year. The fact that they weren't replaced adequately is probably part of the problem, which is uncharacteristic of Monchi, the director of football at Sevilla, but some real distinct kind of caveats as to why Lopetegui might not have been so successful at the start of this season. But I kind of encompass the featured players of Lopetegui into an 11 that would have kind of characterized his tenure. And if I just quickly share my screen with you, I've got it up here in front of me. So, like I say, a 4-3-3 featuring the likes of Navas at right back, Acuna and Reguilon at left back. Reguilon, who had a big move to Spurs. He's obviously developed players to such an extent that they can get some big moves off the back of it. Like I say, Jules Koundé now at Barcelona, Diego Carlos making a move to the Premier League. But you can see that his teams aren't necessarily going to kind of have out-and-out wingers, flying at defences. You can almost, I would say, kind of draw a line from down the centre of the pitch from the striker and look at the wide kind of positions in terms of the wider central midfielders, the wider forwards and the wider fullbacks operating in kind of relationships, almost creating those triangles in wide areas, and actually to get into advanced areas of the pitch, and then getting the likes of Navas and Acuna into positions to create those key passes, like I suggested earlier, to create chances and shots at goal. So really, really important that our players kind of get in tune with that and start to understand, especially the likes of Semedo, very wasteful in forward areas, Aït-Nouri as well. These guys are going to be important to the way that Lopetegui would like to play. The midfield is kind of built of all-rounders, I would suggest. Rakitic probably the most technical of the three in there. Fernando very much a destroyer, and Jordan kind of being a bit of an in-between kind of player. So I wouldn't expect us necessarily to reconfigure our midfield too much. And if I was to kind of show what this team kind of looked like from a Wolves perspective, at least, this is what I would suggest. And I've got an interesting kind of innovation. Well, perhaps not an innovation, but something that I thought about when you think about the kind of players that we've got within our squad. You look at it, it doesn't look like it's a fat lot of difference between what we're seeing at the moment. But the one player I do think about and wonder what Lopetegui would do with is Adama Traoré, Spaniard, worked with him at an international level. Is there perhaps a kind of a reinvigoration of the Adama at right back or wing back as he was previously role? I don't know. It's just a suggestion, perhaps, that maybe he's not likely to want his wide forwards to just be stuck out on the wing. Like I say, he wants his fullbacks to be doing that work, and it kind of helps that possession game if the players inside are able to combine with the midfielders, likes of Neto, Podence, Guedes, will have that technical quality to really dominate the middle area of the pitch from a possession standpoint. And you're looking at, like I say, those relationships from a wide area, fullback bombing on with Nunes, Nuri, Guedes, creating those triangles, overloads in wide spaces, and then feeding a real kind of all-rounder with a set of forward as well. And I think the likes of Kaladzic can look to the success of a player like Luke de Jong, who did really well at Sevilla, got a move to Barcelona off the back of it again, but very much quite a static central striker, feeds off crosses, feeds off delivery from wide areas, but scored a lot of goals for Sevilla as well. He's defending this area again, a bit more of an all-rounder, and maybe there is a bit of a renaissance for Jimenez in the offing if he does get back to full fitness and start to play a bit more. What I will say, I think the likes of Moutinho are likely to be lent upon quite a bit. I wouldn't necessarily suggest, we're going to see lots of young players coming through from the academy, but I think Mateus Nunes ultimately is the big kind of project that Lopetegui is going to need to get his teeth stuck into, and hopefully kind of bring the best out of him. I mean, we know he was the guy who gave Ruben Neves his debut. Maybe there's a relationship there to build upon in terms of keeping him at the club. But I think it's good news ultimately that we're actually heading in the right direction. He's a reputable manager. Obviously worked with Spain, worked with Real Madrid, worked with some of the biggest players on the planet. He has that kudos and gravitas that someone like Bruno Lage probably didn't have. He'll earn the respect of his squad and his players, and hopefully really kind of eke out the best form from them, because they're lacking in such confidence. We know we have talented players, and ultimately I think getting the starting point should be getting the most of out of what we already got, because there is plenty to work with there, and hopefully then he will identify the kind of players that can improve upon that. We know we need to start scoring more goals. Whether he sees that as an immediate need and he brings people in January, obviously will remain to be seen, and potentially we'll have a look at who we could bring in as options to kind of bolster this squad in the Lopetegui style. But it's finally some good news on the managerial front as a Wolves fan. So looking forward to Julen Lopetegui joining the club, and really the season starts after the World Cup break. But I'll speak to you all soon, and hopefully looking towards a positive result to see out the season prior to the World Cup against Brighton.